The shriek of the whistle cut through the suburban quiet like a blade. It was a silver, unforgiving sound, the kind that vibrates in your teeth and makes dogs a block away start barking. It was also, at that particular moment, my new favorite sound in the entire world. "Ma'am!" I barked, my voice a good octave lower than usual. I was aiming for authoritative, but probably landing somewhere near constipated drill sergeant. "Interfering with a traffic safety official is a serious violation. Please, step back!" A woman with a helmet of blonde hair so rigid it looked like it could deflect small arms fire stood frozen on the lawn, her hand hovering over one of my bright orange traffic cones. Her face, which was already a tight mask of indignation, was rapidly turning the color of a ripe plum. This was Brenda. I didn't know her last name, but in my head she was already Brenda, queen of the cul-de-sac, first of her name, tyrant of the HOA. Behind me, a large white van hummed patiently. Its driver, a woman named Maria, was watching the whole absurd spectacle from her window with the wide, disbelieving eyes of someone witnessing a unicorn get a parking ticket. In my hands, I held two light-up marshalling wands, currently switched off. I was wearing a neon yellow high-visibility vest over my faded Metallica t-shirt, and a slightly too large white hard hat was perched on my head. I probably looked like the world's least qualified air traffic controller, or maybe a construction worker who had gotten very, very lost on his way to the job site. Brenda's perfectly manicured lawn, the pride of the neighborhood, and the recent recipient of the Lawn of the Month award, an award I was certain she had given to herself, now had a neat little row of my traffic cones creating a makeshift lane across its emerald surface. Two pristine, muddy tire tracks from the van were already scarring her masterpiece. It was beautiful. She finally found her voice, a screech that made the whistle sound like a lullaby. "Who do you think you are? You are destroying my fescue. This is vandalism. I am calling the police." I clicked my pen and made a serious-looking scribble on the clipboard I was holding. "Duly noted, ma'am. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a vehicle to move." You're probably wondering how I got here. It's a fair question. How does a 30-something graphic designer who just moved to the suburbs for some peace and quiet end up in a full-blown traffic control-themed showdown with the local HOA president? It wasn't a life goal, I can tell you that. But like most things in life, it started with a perfectly normal day that took a hard left turn into crazy town. It had all begun 3 weeks earlier. My world had been one of sirens, upstairs neighbors who seemed to be training for a professional clog dancing competition, and a view of a brick wall from my apartment window. After years of saving, I finally did it. I bought a house. A real, honest-to-God house with a 2-car garage, a backyard with patchy grass that was all mine, and more shades of beige paint than I knew existed. It was in a planned community called Willow Creek Estates. There were no willows and no creeks, but there were definitely estates. Rows of them, all slightly different but depressingly similar, like a copy-paste error in the Matrix. But it was quiet. Oh, the glorious, blissful quiet. For the first week, I just sat on my back porch, listening to the sound of nothing. Just birds. Maybe a distant lawnmower. It was paradise. I was on a mind-numbing conference call, doodling a client's logo for the 10th time, when I saw her. A woman in crisp white capri pants and a pink polo shirt was crouched on my new neighbor's lawn. In her hand was a tape measure. She meticulously measured the distance from the base of a garden gnome to the edge of the driveway, her lips moving as she counted. Then she stood up, jotted something down in a thick 3-ring binder, and stared at the gnome with pure, unadulterated contempt. Later that afternoon, while attempting to coax my sad, yellowing lawn into something resembling life with a garden hose, I met Dave. He was my next-door neighbor, a friendly guy with the perpetually tired eyes of a man who has seen too much. He was trimming his hedges with an almost manic precision. "Hey there," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "You must be Alex. Welcome to the neighborhood. I'm Dave." "Good to meet you," I said, just trying to figure out if this lawn is salvageable or if I should just pave it over. Dave chuckled. "Give it time. Just make sure you're using an HOA-approved grass seed. And don't water on Tuesdays between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. It's against the bylaws." I must have looked confused. "The bylaws?" He gestured with his hedge clippers towards the woman I'd seen earlier, who was now examining someone's mailbox with the intensity of a bomb disposal expert. "You saw her yet? That's Brenda, HOA president. My advice?" He leaned in conspiratorially. "Don't make eye contact. Don't plant unapproved petunias. And for the love of God, make sure your garbage can is back in your garage by 6:01 p.m. on trash day, or you'll get a notice laminated and stuck to your door." This had to be a joke. "You're kidding, right?" Dave's smile was grim. "I wish I were. This is the woman who orchestrated the great mailbox standardization of 22. We all had to buy new, identical $400 mailboxes because she decided the old ones lacked thematic cohesion. Last summer was the war on wind chimes. Apparently, their gentle, tinkling sound was causing her auditory distress. I stared at Brenda, who was now taking a photo of the offending mailbox. She wasn't a neighborhood watch. She was a neighborhood warden. So she's passionate. "Passionate is what you call someone who loves dogs," Dave said. "Brenda loves power. Her husband's some big-shot surgeon who's never home, so this is her kingdom. She roams the streets with that binder. We call it the Book of Grudges. Just looking for infractions. She has no power in her own life, so she creates it by controlling everyone else's." I laughed it off, but a small seed of unease was planted. My dream of suburban peace suddenly seemed to have a 5'4" gatekeeper with a tape measure. A few days later, while finally tackling the mountain of boxes in the garage, I rediscovered my inheritance. My Uncle Carl had been a wonderful man, but also a deeply eccentric one. He was a serial hobbyist. He'd dive into a new passion for a month, buy all the top-of-the-line gear, and then abandon it just as quickly for the next new thing. When he passed away, he'd left me his house and everything in it. Most of it was junk, but some of it was glorious junk. Behind a stack of barely used home brewing equipment and a half-finished taxidermy project involving a squirrel and a tiny fez, there it was, his community safety phase. It must have lasted a whole 2 weeks. There was a professional-grade heavy-duty stack of 20 bright orange traffic cones. There was a roll of yellow caution tape. There was a pristine neon yellow reflective vest and a white hard hat. Tucked inside the vest's pocket was a silver whistle and a pair of battery-operated red and green light-up marshalling wands. The pièce de résistance was a laminated ID badge on a lanyard, featuring a very serious photo of Uncle Carl and the words, "Community Safety Coordinator." I held it up, laughing to myself. What on earth am I ever going to do with this stuff? I thought, tossing it back into the box. It was the most useless, ridiculous collection of things I owned. Famous last thoughts. The day it all went down started like any other Tuesday. I was at my desk, deep in the tedious process of kerning fonts, when the sound of a car horn, long and insistent, broke the afternoon quiet. It was followed by the unmistakable sound of a shrill, angry voice. My curiosity piqued, I walked to my front window, which had a perfect panoramic view of the street. And there it was. A large white van, the kind used for medical transport, was stopped dead. The reason was obvious. A gleaming white SUV, Brenda's of course, was parked perfectly sideways, blocking the entire width of the road. It wasn't just a bad park job, it was a statement. a declaration of immovable obstinance. Brenda stood beside her car, phone pressed to her ear, but clearly performing for an audience of one. The van's driver, who had just gotten out. I cracked my window open, and the sound came flooding in. "This is a residential street, not a loading dock." Brenda's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "The CC and Rs are crystal clear about commercial vehicles. You have 15 minutes to conduct your business and leave. It's Section 11, Article B, Paragraph 4. No commercial vehicle shall remain stationary on a community thoroughfare for a period exceeding 1/4 of an hour." The driver, a woman with a weary face and a calm demeanor, stood her ground. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I'm not delivering a pizza. My name is Maria. I'm here to pick up Leo for his physical therapy appointment. He's a 10-year-old boy. He has trouble walking. We do this 3 times a week. Can you please just move your car so I can get to his driveway?" My blood started to simmer. This wasn't about a wind chime anymore. This was about a kid who needed to get to his doctor. Brenda was unmoved. An appointment is not an emergency. The rules are in place to maintain the aesthetic and tranquility of our community. I will not have large, unsightly vans loitering about, scaring the neighborhood pets. She gestured vaguely with her free hand, as if the van was a rogue elephant. Prince is very sensitive to loud diesel engines. Maria's professional calm was starting to crack. "It's a Ford Transit van, ma'am. It's not a Mack truck. It's barely louder than your SUV. Look, I'm going to be late. Leo's parents are going to be worried." Then perhaps they should have considered the logistical ramifications of living in a community with such stringent yet fair regulations, Brenda sniffed. "I am on the phone with the management company now. They will confirm that I am well within my rights." That was it. My brain has a switch. It's a switch that flips from reasonable adult who avoids conflict to dramatic solutions enthusiast. Most of my life, that switch stays firmly in the off position. But watching this woman, drunk on her petty thimbleful of power, blocking a medical transport for a child over a rule she was probably misinterpreting on purpose, was too much. Brenda, with her rule book and her smugness, had just leaned over and flipped that switch with both hands. My first thought was to call the cops, but I knew Dave was right. That could take forever. A parking dispute in the suburbs? We'd be lucky if they got here by dinner. Maria would be late. The kid's appointment would be missed. Brenda would see it as a victory, her authority validated. No, that wouldn't do. My gaze drifted from the scene on the street to my own garage door. An image flashed in my mind. Bright orange cones, a yellow vest, a hard hat. A terrible, beautiful, theatrical idea began to blossom in my mind, fully formed and glorious in its absurdity. Brenda wanted things to be official? Fine. We were about to get very, very official. I turned from the window, a slow grin spreading across my face. I had a job to do. Walking into my garage was like stepping into a theater's prop department. I strode past the lawnmower, past the boxes of books, and went straight for the corner of Uncle Carl's magnificent junk. I pulled out the box labeled Community Safety. The contents spilled onto the concrete floor like a promise of chaos. This couldn't be a half measure. If I was going to do this, I had to commit. I couldn't just be a guy with a traffic cone. I had to become the cone. I had to be the living, breathing embodiment of bureaucratic procedure. First, the vest. The neon yellow fabric was stiff and smelled faintly of mothballs and my uncle's Old Spice. I slipped it on over my t-shirt. It was instantly transformative. I felt a surge of unearned authority. I looked in the dusty side mirror of my car. I looked ridiculous. It was perfect. Next, the hard hat. It settled onto my head with a hollow thud, the adjustable strap a little loose. I tightened it until it was snug. I was no longer just Alex, the graphic designer. I was a man with a purpose. A man with head protection. The clipboard was key. A man with a clipboard can get away with anything. I grabbed a pen and a pad of paper, clicking the pen a few times for effect. I practiced looking at the pad and nodding seriously. Then, the wands. I flicked the switch on one. A brilliant red light bloomed at the tip. The other one glowed green. They felt solid in my hands, like lightsabers for the pathologically organized. The final touch. The cherry on top of this sundae of insanity. I looped the lanyard around my neck. Uncle Carl's stern, mustachioed face stared out from the ID card. His title, Community Safety Coordinator, resting on my chest like a badge of honor. I took a deep breath, puffed out my chest, and strode out of the garage and into the sunlight, my face set in a mask of grim determination. I didn't even look at Brenda. That was crucial. She was a problem to be managed, not a person to be engaged with. My focus was the scene itself. I walked with purpose to the back of Maria's van and began my work. Thump. The first cone hit the asphalt. I placed it 5 feet behind the van. Thump. The second one, creating the start of a new lane. Thump, thump, thump. I laid them out in a graceful, curving arc. A bright orange line that veered off the road, hopped the curb, and pointed directly across the corner of Brenda's prize-winning lawn. The effect was immediate. Brenda's shrill monologue cut off mid-sentence. I could feel her eyes on me, burning holes in the back of my vest. I ignored her. I was in the zone. I was a professional. I walked the path I had created, my boots sinking slightly into the plush, recently fertilized turf. I made a small adjustment to the final cone, making sure it was perfectly aligned for re-entry onto the street. What do you think you're doing?" Her voice was a mixture of confusion and outrage. I turned slowly, my expression neutral, my gaze sweeping over her as if she were a minor, inconvenient pothole. "Get those off my lawn! You are not authorized!" she shrieked. I held up a hand, a universal gesture for calm down, civilian. My voice came out deeper than I expected. A monotone drone I must have absorbed from years of watching procedural crime dramas. "Ma'am, please stand back," I said, looking at my clipboard. "This is now an active traffic control incident scene. For your own safety and the safety of our team, please remain on the designated pedestrian walkway." I scribbled a meaningless squiggle on my notepad. "We've got a Code 14B obstruction, ma'am. Need to reroute to maintain minimum vehicular flow as per Municipal Ordinance 7/9. The jargon, utterly meaningless, hung in the air. Brenda's brain seemed to short-circuit. She was used to being the one citing non-existent rules, not having them cited back at her. "Code? What code? You're making that up. You work for the city?" "I'm a community safety coordinator, ma'am," I said, tapping Uncle Carl's ID badge. "We're an auxiliary unit. We handle localized flow management issues." By now, the spectacle had drawn an audience. The curtains in Dave's window were twitching frantically. Mr. Henderson from 3 houses down, a retiree who spent most of his day on his porch, was now standing up, leaning on his railing. A young mom pushing a stroller paused on the sidewalk, her mouth slightly agape. My little bit of street theater had a full house. This seemed to enrage Brenda even more. Her power was built on an audience of the intimidated, not the amused. She lunged for the nearest cone on her lawn. "I will not have you—" That's when I deployed the whistle. The piercing shriek stopped her dead in her tracks. Her hand recoiled from the cone as if it were electrified. "Ma'am," I barked, "interfering with a traffic safety official is a serious violation. Please, step back." She was sputtering now, a torrent of incoherent rage. "My lawn, my fescue, you— Who? I'll have your job." I ignored her. The performance was reaching its climax. It was time for the grand finale. I turned to Maria in the van, who was now covering her mouth, her shoulders shaking with what I sincerely hoped was suppressed laughter. I gave her a crisp, professional nod. Then, I raised my wands. I flicked the switch. A brilliant green light sliced through the afternoon sun. With the exaggerated, sweeping gestures of a man guiding a 747 to its gate, I began to direct her. I pointed with the green wand down the path of cones. I gave a little, "Come on, bring it through" swirl. Maria, God bless her, was a brilliant improviser. She got it immediately. She gave me a solemn thumbs up from her driver's seat, turned the wheel, and eased the van forward. The front tire bumped gently up over the curb. The van tilted slightly as it moved onto Brenda's lawn. The soft earth gave way, and the tires left two perfect, deep, muddy tracks in the impossibly green grass. It was a scar of victory. I continued to guide her, my face a mask of intense concentration, waving the wand with purpose as she drove the 10-foot path across the lawn and bumped back down onto the street on the other side of Brenda's illegally parked SUV. The road was clear. As she passed me, Maria rolled down her window, her face perfectly straight. "Thank you, officer." I gave her a curt nod. "Just doing my job, ma'am. Drive safe." She pulled away, leaving me standing there, wands in hand, amidst my beautiful orange cones. Brenda was a statue of pure fury, left alone in the middle of the road next to her useless blockade. The sound of muffled laughter drifted from Dave's porch. Mr. Henderson was openly chuckling. The mom with the stroller was shaking her head, a huge grin on her face. The whole thing from the first cone to the van driving away took maybe 2 minutes. I clicked off my wands, my work here done. I took a slight, almost imperceptible bow and began to calmly gather my equipment, as if this was all in a day's work for the brave men and women of the Community Safety Auxiliary Unit. Of course, that's when the real cops showed up. Humiliated, powerless, and standing over the fresh wounds on her lawn, Brenda had done the only thing she had left to do. She'd called 911. Her voice on the call, I imagined, was probably somewhere in the sonic range of a pterodactyl. The patrol car rolled up silently, its lights off. 2 officers got out. The first was Officer Johnson, young, eager, with a posture so straight it looked painful. He had his hand on his notepad before his second foot was even out of the car. The second was Officer Miller. Miller looked like he had been poured into his uniform that morning and had been slowly leaking enthusiasm ever since. He had the weary, 1,000-yard stare of a man who had answered one too many calls about stolen garden gnomes. He sighed, a deep, profound sound that seemed to carry the weight of all the petty disputes in suburbia. "Dispatch said impersonating a traffic cop," Miller mumbled to his partner, just loud enough for me to hear. I was picturing something a little more. Village people. This is just sad. Brenda descended upon them like a hawk on a field mouse. "Officers, thank goodness, arrest this man," she screeched, pointing a trembling finger at me. I had just finished stacking my last cone. "He's impersonating a city worker. He vandalized my lawn. He threatened me." Johnson started taking notes furiously. "Ma'am, can you spell fescue for me?" Miller, meanwhile, completely ignored her. His gaze took in the whole scene. Brenda's SUV still parked like a barrier. The muddy tracks on the lawn, the pile of traffic cones, and me, a guy in a Metallica shirt and a hard hat. He walked over to me, his pace unhurried. He looked me up and down, then gestured at the cones with his chin. "So, let me get this straight," he said, his voice a low gravel. "You own these cones?" I'd taken off the hard hat and vest, hoping to de-escalate back to normal citizen status. "Yes, sir, officer," I said politely. "They were my uncle's. He also left me a surprising amount of asbestos insulation, if you're interested." Miller's lips twitched. It was the slightest of movements, but it was there, a tiny crack in his armor of apathy. And you used them to divert traffic around an illegally parked vehicle that was obstructing a medical transport? That's the gist of it, officer, I confirmed. I identified a public safety hazard and implemented a temporary, citizen-led solution. Is there a law against promoting vehicular flow? He's lying, Brenda yelled from 10 feet away. He's a menace. Miller turned his head slowly towards her. Ma'am, was your vehicle parked in the middle of the road blocking traffic? I was within my rights. The CC&Rs. I'm not asking about the CC&Rs, ma'am. I'm asking about the vehicle code. The one the rest of us have to follow, Miller said, his voice devoid of any emotion. He turned back to me. His methods, he said, gesturing at me, then looking at his partner, were unorthodox. He looked back at me. And not recommended. He then looked over at Brenda's lawn. But impersonating an officer is a specific crime. It involves claiming to be a police officer to get someone to do something. He claimed to be a... He glanced at my ID still hanging around my neck. Community Safety Coordinator. That's not a police officer. And as for the lawn, that would be a civil matter, though I suspect the judge might be interested to hear why the van had to drive on it in the first place. He then fixed Brenda with a stare that could curdle milk. Ma'am, blocking a public right-of-way is a ticketable offense. Obstructing a medical vehicle is even more serious. I'm going to give you a formal warning this time. Move your car, now. Brenda's jaw worked silently. She had lost on every front. Defeated, she stalked to her SUV, got in without another word, and drove it into her garage, the door slamming shut behind her like a portcullis. Miller turned back to me. He gave me a long, hard look. Don't do this again, he said. But the corner of his mouth was definitely curled up this time. Keep the traffic control hobby in the garage from now on. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, delivered with a clear, unspoken wink. Yes, sir, officer, I said, giving him a little salute. He and Johnson got back in their car and drove away. I was left alone on the sidewalk, the hero of the cul-de-sac. The war, I thought, was over. I had won. I was so wrong. I hadn't ended a war. I had just fired the first shot in one. The counterattack came the next morning. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, passive-aggressive, and laminated. Taped to my front door was a sheaf of papers, each an official-looking violation notice from the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association, signed with a flourish by Brenda, president. My crimes were numerous and varied. Violation of bylaw 7.4, lawn height. My grass, in one specific patch near the driveway, was measured at 3.3 inches. The maximum allowable height was 3.0 inches. Fine, $50. Violation of bylaw 12.1. Non-standard entry decor. My simple black welcome mat was apparently not on the pre-approved list of 37 welcome mat designs. It was deemed aesthetically discordant. Fine, $75. Violation of bylaw 9.6. Unapproved font usage. The stick-on numbers on my house, the ones that had been there when I bought it, were in a serif font. Times New Roman, I think. The approved font was Helvetica Neue. Fine, $100. Violation of bylaw 15.2. Storage of industrial equipment. My traffic cones, despite being neatly stacked in my own garage, were visible for the 30 seconds my garage door was open. Fine, $250. Special assessment. Property damage to common area aesthetics. This was the big one. The tire tracks on Brenda's lawn. She was classifying her personal lawn as a common aesthetic area. The fine forer sodding and emotional distress was a whopping $500. Total fines, $975. I stood there, reading the list, a slow burn starting in my chest. This wasn't about rules. This was a declaration of total war. Brenda couldn't beat me in person, so she was going to paper-cut me to death with her binder. Appeasement was not an option. Retreat was not an option. I had to go on the offensive. My eyes drifted to my backyard. It was a sad, barren patch of dirt. I'd been planning on putting in a deck eventually. Eventually had just become immediately. A deck meant permits. It meant construction. It meant noise, dust, and a team of burly men invading the zen-like tranquility of Brenda's kingdom for weeks on end. It was the perfect weapon. I spent the next hour on my laptop searching for the highest-rated, most badass-looking construction company in the area. I found them. Gus's Gut Jobs and Remodeling. Their slogan was, "We build it right, we build it loud." Their logo was a bulldog in a hard hat. I called the number. A booming voice answered on the second ring. "Gus's, you got Gus." The man who showed up at my house that afternoon was exactly as I'd pictured. Gus was a mountain. He was built like a vending machine with a head, with a thick beard, a booming laugh, and hands the size of dinner plates. He strode into my backyard, his steel-toed boots sinking into the dirt. "So, deck, huh? Good space. We can do a nice 2-tier here, composite, built-in benches, the whole 9 yards, he said, already visualizing it. "That sounds great," I said, "but there's a small complication. The HOA president. She lives right there." I pointed to Brenda's house, which loomed over my backyard fence. "And she and I are not on the best of terms." Gus squinted at her house. "The blonde lady with the little white dog that yaps all day?" "That's the one." "Brenda?" he grunted. "Yeah, we know Brenda. Did a roof for the Hendersons down the street. She called the city on us 3 times. Said our nail guns were too loud." He shook his head. "So what did you do to get on her bad side?" I decided to go all in. I told him the whole story, the van, the kid, the rules, the cones, the vest, the wands, the cops. As I told it, a slow grin spread across Gus's face. When I got to the part about guiding the van across her lawn, he let out a laugh that shook the windows. He slapped his enormous thigh. "You did what?" he roared, wiping a tear from his eye. "Buddy, that is the greatest thing I have ever heard. A Code 14B obstruction. Oh, that's beautiful." He clapped me on the shoulder, nearly sending me through the floor. "Consider it done. And consider this a personal favor. We're going to build you the best damn deck you've ever seen. And we are going to be so by the book, so compliant, it'll drive that woman straight up a wall. It'll be our masterpiece." Gus and I had formed an immediate and holy alliance. The deck was no longer a home improvement project. It was a strategic military operation. Construction began the following Monday. Gus's crew were artists of malicious compliance. A city ordinance stated that construction noise could not begin before 7 a.m. At 6:55 a.m. every morning, Gus's giant pickup truck would rumble to a stop in front of my house. His crew would get out, stretch, drink their coffee, and at precisely 7 hours 0 minutes and 1 second a.m., the first rhythmic thwack of a hammer would echo through the morning quiet, followed by the roar of a circular saw. They brought in a porta-potty as required for any long-term job site. Gus, with a mischievous twinkle in his eye, had it placed in the corner of my backyard that afforded the most direct, unobstructed view from Brenda's kitchen window. They also brought a large radio, and every day from 7:01 a.m. to 5 p.m., my backyard was filled with the sounds of classic rock, AC/DC, Led Zeppelin, Guns N' Roses. All played just under the legal decibel limit. Brenda's response was predictable. She became a one-woman surveillance state. She was out there every day, her phone held up, filming them. She would stand at her fence, a grim sentinel, timing their lunch breaks with a stopwatch. She called in a complaint that their supply truck was parked more than 12 inches from the curb. It was 11.5 inches, Gus had measured. She filed a formal grievance about the unpleasant odor from the porta potty. The siege came to a head in the 3rd week. Brenda, convinced she'd finally caught them, called the city building inspector. She claimed they were using unstamped lumber and that the support footings were not up to code. The inspector, a tired-looking man named Frank, arrived that afternoon. Brenda met him on the sidewalk, triumphantly pointing out her evidence. Frank sighed, walked into my backyard, and spent a full 30 minutes with Gus. He looked at the permits, which were in perfect order. He examined the footings, which were dug deeper than required. He inspected the lumber, which was top grade and stamped. Finally, Frank and Gus walked back out to the front where Brenda was waiting, vibrating with anticipation. "The work is impeccable," Frank announced, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "Frankly, Gus, it's some of the cleanest work I've seen all year. Your permits are perfect. You're golden." He then turned to Brenda, his expression souring. "Ma'am, this is the 4th frivolous call I've had to respond to on this block in the last year, and all of them have come from you. You are wasting valuable city resources. If you call my office again without concrete, photographic proof of a serious violation, I will be speaking to my supervisor about filing a harassment complaint against you." Gus's crew, who had been listening from the backyard, let out a loud, spontaneous cheer. Brenda's face went white, then red, then a strange, mottled purple. She had been publicly dressed down and dismissed. She turned without a word and retreated back into her fortress. We had won the battle, but I knew the war wasn't over. She was like a cornered animal now, which made her more dangerous. I knew I couldn't just keep defending. I had to end it. I had to checkmate the queen. That night, over a beer with Gus after his crew had left, we devised the final gambit. "She's obsessed with what you're going to do next," Gus said, taking a long pull from his bottle. "She's watching your every move. So, we give her something to watch." The plan was simple. It was elegant. It was pure psychological warfare. The next afternoon, as his crew was packing up, Gus accidentally left something behind on the edge of my front lawn. It was a set of rolled-up blueprints, held down by a rock. They were designed to be found. The title block of the blueprints, in big, bold letters, read, "Project Chimera, Front Yard Multimedia Artistic Installation." The drawing itself was a masterpiece of calculated ugliness. It depicted a 10-foot-tall abstract sculpture. The design specifications, listed in meticulous detail, called for a base of recycled tires, a main body of welded rebar and rust-colored scrap metal, and decorative flourishes made from old bowling balls and multicolored hubcaps. Gus had even added a note. All materials to be sourced from local scrapyard for maximum authenticity. The most beautiful part? Gus had spent an hour cross-referencing the HOA bylaws. The sculpture's height, its setback from the sidewalk, its material composition. It was all, by the letter of the law, technically compliant. It was hideous, but it was legal. I watched from my window that evening. Sure enough, just after dusk, Brenda's front door creaked open. She scurried across the lawn like a goblin, snatched the blueprints, and retreated back into her house. The bait was taken. The next day, laminated notices were on every door in Willow Creek Estates. Emergency HOA meeting. The agenda had only one item: to discuss and vote upon a new bylaw, Bylaw 18.7, prohibiting the installation of non-traditional artistic structures and regulating front yard aesthetics. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse. The room was packed. Most of the neighbors weren't there because they cared about abstract art. They were there for the show. This was the season finale of the neighborhood drama, and nobody wanted to miss it. Dave sat next to me, a bucket of popcorn hidden in his lap. Brenda stood at the front of the room, looking frazzled and unhinged. She had the fake blueprints pinned to a corkboard. "Look at it!" she shrieked, her voice echoing in the small room. This monstrosity. This is what he plans to put in his front yard 10 feet from my own. He will turn our beautiful, respectable neighborhood into a junkyard. Our property values will plummet. This is a violation of everything Willow Creek Estates stands for. She went on for 10 minutes, a rambling, frantic tirade about aesthetics, cohesion, and the sanctity of lawns. She was losing the crowd. People were starting to fidget. Finally, she called for a vote on her new, hastily written bylaw. Just as hands were about to go up, I stood. "Brenda," I said, my voice calm and clear. Every eye in the room turned to me. "Everyone, there is no sculpture." A confused murmur went through the crowd. Brenda stared at me, her mouth hanging open. "Those plans are fake," I continued, my voice getting stronger. "I had my contractor draw them up and leave them on my lawn because I knew you wouldn't be able to resist. I knew you'd snoop, I knew you'd find them." I let that sink in. "I just wanted to see what you would do. I wanted everyone in this room to see how you would abuse your power, call an emergency meeting, and try to invent a new rule on the spot, just to target one resident you have a personal vendetta against." I took a step forward. "This isn't about a sculpture, just like it wasn't about my welcome mat or the font on my house numbers, and it was never, ever about a commercial vehicle bylaw. It was about a 10-year-old boy named Leo who almost missed his physical therapy appointment because our HOA president decided to use her car to illegally blockade a medical transport van. It was about a woman who values her own petty sense of control more than the well-being of a child in her own neighborhood." The room was dead silent. Brenda was ashen. "The bylaws of this HOA state that the board's primary duty is to act in the best interest of the community, so I have a motion," I said, my voice ringing with finality. "I move for a vote of no confidence in Brenda as president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, on the grounds of a clear and persistent pattern of harassment, abuse of power, and conduct unbecoming of a board member." Before the words were even fully out of my mouth, Dave shot up from his seat. "I second the motion!" he yelled, spilling half his popcorn. It was a landslide. One by one, hands went up all over the room. Old Mr. Henderson, the mom with the stroller, dozens of people I'd never even spoken to. All of them, tired of the petty tyranny, voted yes. Brenda stood there, utterly defeated, her reign of terror over. In the chaotic aftermath, a flustered Dave was nominated and reluctantly elected the new HOA president. His first decree was to promise to never call a meeting again unless the neighborhood is literally on fire, and even then, I'll probably just send an email. A month later, I was standing on my magnificent new deck. The smell of grilling burgers filled the air. Dave was there, looking 10 years younger, laughing with Gus and his wife. The classic rock coming from my speakers was, for once, just for enjoyment. A car pulled up, and Maria, the van driver, got out with her husband and son. She handed me a card. Inside was a crayon drawing of a man in a hard hat directing a van away from a snarling stick figure. At the bottom it read, "Thank you for being our hero," signed by Leo. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the street, we all saw it. A moving truck was parked in front of Brenda's house. She was loading the last of her boxes into her white SUV. Before getting in, she looked across the street and locked eyes with me. It was a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. I smiled, raised my beer bottle in a silent, final toast, and gave her a small, polite wave. She glared, then got in her car and sped away, leaving Willow Creek Estates for good. I leaned back in my new deck chair, the cold bottle of beer a perfect weight in my hand. The air was quiet. No one was measuring gnomes. No vans were being held hostage. It was peaceful. It was perfect. Dave clinked his bottle against mine. "To Alex," he said with a grin. The man who brought down a tyrant with a handful of traffic cones and a fake sculpture. I took a long, satisfying sip. You know, I said, a slow grin spreading across my face, I think I'm really going to like it here.